Some losses carve holes so deep in your heart that you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. Elira knew that emptiness well as she knelt at her husband's grave, 53 years old and utterly alone in a world that had forgotten how to be kind. The village was trapped under 7 days of relentless blizzard, and hope was as scarce as firewood. Then, at dawn, through the white storm, came a figure that belonged in legends, an ancient vampire lord with eyes that held centuries of pain. "Come with me," he said softly, and somehow Elira heard not a command, but a plea from someone who understood her loneliness. When two broken souls recognize each other, what happens next can change everything. But can a grieving widow find healing in the arms of the undead? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The frozen wedding ring slipped from Elira's numb fingers as she rose from the grave, disappearing into the snow like her old life. She watched it vanish without regret, a simple gold band that had meant everything once, now just another relic of what could never be again. The ancient vampire lord stood motionless behind her, patient as stone, waiting for her answer to his impossible offer. "I am Aldrich," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "And I have been alone far longer than you have." Elira turned to study his face in the pale dawn light. He was not the creature of her childhood nightmares, no fanged monster or seductive predator. Instead, she saw a man carved by time and sorrow, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his eyes holding depths that spoke of endless years. He wore nobility like a second skin, evident in the way he held himself, in the quality of his midnight cloak, in the careful distance he maintained between them. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Because you understand what it means to carry grief as a constant companion," he replied. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who has loved deeply and lost completely. Because in 7 centuries of existence, you are the first person I have met who looks at me and sees not a monster, but simply another soul in pain." The village behind them stirred with the reluctant movements of morning doors creaking open, voices calling across the snow-packed streets, the desperate sound of axes splitting the last of the firewood. Elira's small cottage sat dark and cold, its windows like empty eyes. She had not lit a fire in 3 days, seeing no point in the warmth when her heart remained frozen. Her husband Thomas had died, just as winter's grip tightened around their remote mountain village. A sudden fever, the kind that took strong men in their prime and left their wives to face the harsh season alone. For 32 years, he had been her anchor, her warmth, her reason for rising, each morning. Without him, she had simply existed, going through the motions of life while feeling utterly hollow inside. The other villagers had tried to help at first, bringing soup, offering condolences, suggesting she might find comfort in prayer or community. But grief was not something that could be shared or lessened by well-meaning neighbors. It was a private darkness that made her feel like a stranger in her own skin, disconnected from a world that continued spinning while her own had stopped entirely. Father Matthias emerged from the small stone church, his elderly frame bent against the wind. He had baptized Elira, married her to Thomas, and now had spoken the final words over her husband's grave. His weathered face showed concern as he approached, rosary beads clicking softly in his gnarled hands. "Child," he said gently, though at 53 she was hardly that, "you need not face this choice in haste. The storm will pass." "And will it?" Elira interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Will the storm pass, Father, or will it simply be replaced by another and another after that? How many more winters can this village endure? How many more of us will we lose to hunger and cold?" The priest's silence was answer enough. They all knew the truth. The village was dying a slow death, its young people long since departed for distant cities, its resources dwindling with each passing year. The blizzard that had trapped them for a week was merely the latest in a series of trials that seemed to grow worse with each season. Anna, the village healer, approached through the swirling snow, her bag of herbs and remedies clutched tight against her chest. She had tended Thomas in his final hours, had held Elira's hand as his breathing grew shallow, had closed his eyes when the end finally came. Her presence was a comfort, though her expression showed deep worry. "The children are growing weak," Anna said quietly. "Little Marcus has not woken since yesterday, and the Bergman baby struggles for each breath. We need food, warmth, medicine, things we simply do not have." Elira looked between the priest and the healer, then back at the vampire, who waited with infinite patience. In his dark eyes, she saw something she had not expected: genuine care, not just for her, but for the suffering around them. There was power in his stillness, ancient knowledge in his bearing, and most surprisingly, a capacity for compassion that she had not imagined possible in one of his kind. "What are you offering exactly?" she asked Aldrich directly. "Companionship," he replied without hesitation. "A chance for both of us to find purpose again. I have resources: food for your village, warmth for the children, medicine for the sick. I ask only for your presence, your conversation, your willingness to help me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond mere survival. And what would become of me in your world?" "You would remain yourself," he said firmly. "I seek neither servant nor victim. I offer a partnership between equals: your humanity to remind me of what I once was, my protection to shield you from a world that has grown too harsh for kindness." The obsidian medallion at his throat caught the morning light, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance when viewed directly. It was clearly ancient, a family crest of some noble house that had ruled when kingdoms were young and the world was full of magic. The weight of history hung around him like his midnight cloak, speaking of responsibilities carried across centuries. "There are others of your kind?" Elira asked. "A court of sorts," Aldrich admitted. "Ancient beings who have forgotten how to feel anything but hunger and ambition. They will question my choice in bringing a mortal among them, but they will not dare challenge me directly. I am older than most, stronger than all, and I have grown weary of their endless games of power." Father Matthias stepped closer, his voice lowered to barely a whisper. "There are things you do not know, child. Things your husband kept hidden to protect you. Your bloodline." "Father," Aldrich interrupted sharply, though not unkindly. "That knowledge is not yours to share. When the time comes for understanding, it will come naturally." The priest fell silent, but his eyes held secrets that made Elira's heart race. What had Thomas hidden from her? What truths lay buried in her family's past that even this ancient creature seemed to know? The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against their faces like tiny daggers. In the village, a child's cough echoed from one of the houses, wet and desperate, the sound of lungs filling with fluid. Death was stalking their small community, patient and inevitable unless something changed. "The village council meets today to decide our fate," Anna said quietly. "Some speak of abandoning our homes, trying to reach the four lowlands before the passes become completely impassable. Others believe we should stay and pray for spring to come early. Both choices may lead to the same end." Elira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down upon her. To leave with this creature meant abandoning everything familiar, stepping into a world she could barely comprehend. To stay meant watching her neighbors slowly starve and freeze, meant facing another season of desperation with no hope of improvement. When she opened her eyes, Aldrich was studying her with an expression of such profound understanding that it took her breath away. He saw her dilemma, her fear, her desperate need to matter to someone again. In his ancient gaze, she glimpsed something she had not felt since Thomas died, the possibility of being truly seen and valued. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "what happens to them?" She gestured toward the village. "They will be provided for," Aldrich promised. "Food stores that will last until spring. Fuel for their fires, medicine for the sick. My resources are vast, and I have little use for wealth beyond ensuring survival. And you ask nothing in return but my presence?" "I ask for your trust," he corrected gently. "Your willingness to see me as more than the monster your stories have painted. Your patience, as I remember how to be something other than a creature of night and shadow." The first rays of true sunlight broke through the storm clouds, casting long shadows across the snow. Aldrich did not flinch from the light, though Elira noticed he drew his cloak more tightly around himself. Even ancient vampires, it seemed, found winter mornings uncomfortable. In that moment of clarity, surrounded by the evidence of her village's suffering and faced with an impossible choice, Elira felt something shift inside her heart. Not love. It was far too soon for that, but recognition. Here was another soul who had been shaped by loss, who carried the weight of countless years and countless regrets. If she was to have any chance of healing, perhaps it would come through helping someone else find their way back from the darkness. "When would we leave?" she asked, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "Whenever you are ready," Aldrich replied. "Today, if you wish, or we can wait until you have made your farewells and settled your affairs." Elira looked once more at Thomas's grave, already disappearing under fresh snow. The life they had built together was gone, buried as surely as his body lay beneath the frozen earth. Clinging to the past would not bring him back, and it would not ease the suffering around her. "Today," she said firmly, "but first we help them." Aldrich smiled, then the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, revealing the man he had been before immortality claimed him. "Today," he agreed. "First, we help them." As they walked together toward the village, Elira felt the weight of her old life falling away like snow shaking from winter branches. Whatever lay ahead in his world of shadows and ancient magic, it had to be better than slowly dying in the cold. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something stirring in her chest that might, eventually, become hope. The letter lay hidden beneath the false bottom of Thomas's writing desk, wrapped in oiled cloth and sealed with wax that bore a symbol Elira had never seen before, a crescent moon intertwined with a rose, pressed deep into crimson wax. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, the parchment crackling with age despite being written in her husband's familiar hand. "My dearest Elira," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then death has claimed me before I could share the truth I have carried for 33 years. Your bloodline is not what we believed. The Thornwick name carries power that sleeps in your veins. Power that connects you to the old nobility, the vampire courts that once ruled these mountains in harmony with mortal lords." The words swam before her eyes as she read on, each revelation more impossible than the last. Her grandmother had been no simple village woman, but the last daughter of House Ravencrest, a family of mortals who had served as mediators between the human and vampire worlds for centuries. The gift had passed through the women of her line, the ability to see through supernatural glamour, to resist vampire influence, to bridge the gap between two very different kinds of souls. "You were drawn to me," Thomas had written, "not despite my knowledge of these things, but because of it. I was tasked with protecting you, with keeping you hidden until the time came for your heritage to awaken. That time may never come, and for that I have prayed every night. But if it does, know that you are stronger than you believe, and that the choice before you, whatever it may be, is yours alone to make." Elira sank into Thomas's chair, the letter falling from nerveless fingers. Everything made sense now. The way she had always been able to read people's true intentions, the strange dreams that felt more like memories, the inexplicable pull she had felt toward the mysterious stranger at her husband's grave. It had not been chance that brought Aldrich to her. It had been destiny, written in blood and starlight centuries before her birth. A commotion outside drew her attention. Voices were raised in the village square, some angry, others desperate. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice before making her way through the snow to where most of the village had gathered. Old Henrik, the nominal leader of their small community, stood on the church steps with his arms spread wide, trying to calm the crowd. "We must be reasonable," he was saying. "The storm will break soon, and the storm has been raging for 8 days." Anna interrupted, her healer's bag clutched tight against her chest. "Little Marcus died in his sleep last night. The Bergman baby follows close behind. We have perhaps 3 days of grain left, and the children are eating bark and snow to fill their bellies. Then we leave," declared Willem the blacksmith, his massive frame making him impossible to ignore. "We pack what we can carry and make for the lowlands before it's too late. Half of us won't survive the journey," protested Elena, who held her infant close to her chest. "The passes are blocked, the roads buried. We'd be trading certain death here for certain death in the wilderness." Father Matthias emerged from the church, his face grave. "There may be another option," he said quietly. "The stranger who appeared this morning, he has made an offer." The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to where Aldrich stood at the edge of the square. He had not approached the gathering, respecting their need to discuss his proposal without his intimidating presence. But even at a distance, his otherworldly nature was evident in the way the shadows seemed to bend around him, in the absolute stillness with which he waited. "He offers food," the priest continued, "enough to see us through to spring, plus fuel for our fires and medicine for the sick. All he asks in return is companionship for the winter, someone to share his solitude in exchange for our survival." "And who among us would be fool enough to trust a creature of darkness?" Willem demanded, his hand moving instinctively to the iron cross at his throat. "I would." Elira's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. The letter in her bodice seemed to burn against her skin, its revelations giving her the courage to speak truths she was only beginning to understand. "He came to me at Thomas's grave," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Not as a predator seeking prey, but as one lost soul recognizing another. He spoke of loneliness, of the burden of existing without purpose. These are not the words of a monster, but of someone who has forgotten how to hope." "Elira, child," Henrik said gently, "your grief has clouded your judgment. You cannot know what such a creature truly wants." "Cannot I?" She pulled the letter from her bodice, holding it high for all to see. "Thomas left me this, the truth of my bloodline, the reason I can see what others cannot. My family has served as bridge between our two worlds for centuries. This meeting is not chance, but destiny finally asserting itself." The crowd stirred uneasily at her words. Several of the older villagers crossed themselves, while others whispered prayers under their breath. But Anna stepped forward, her weathered face showing not fear but understanding. "I wondered why you never fell ill," the healer said quietly. "In 30 years of tending the sick, I have never seen you catch so much as a cold, and your insights into people's true natures, you always knew who could be trusted and who could not." "Witchcraft," Willem muttered, but his words lacked conviction. "Not witchcraft," Father Matthias corrected firmly. "Divine purpose. There are things in this world older than our faith, things that existed when Christ walked among us, things that are not evil but simply different. If the Lord has given Elira the sight to discern truth from deception, who are we to question his wisdom?" Aldrich chose that moment to approach, moving with fluid grace across the snow. The crowd parted before him, some crossing themselves, others simply staring in fascination at his otherworldly bearing. When he reached the center of the gathering, he inclined his head respectfully to each person present. "I offer freely what you need to survive," he said, his voice carrying easily without strain. "Food enough for every family, fuel for every hearth, medicine for every ailment. I ask nothing but the companionship of one who understands what it means to carry loss as a constant burden." "And if we refuse?" Henrik asked, though his voice lacked challenge. "Then you refuse," Aldrich replied simply. "I will trouble you no more, and you may face the winter as you see fit, but I will not withdraw my offer lightly. Your children's lives hang in the balance, and I have the power to preserve them." Young Elena stepped forward, her baby whimpering in her arms. "My son grows weaker by the hour," she said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "If you can save him, if you can save all our children, then I say we accept your offer." One by one, other parents nodded their agreement. The arithmetic of desperation was simple: certain death if they refused, possible life if they accepted. The choice was no choice at all. "It is decided then," Henrik said heavily. "But know this, stranger, if harm comes to Elira through our agreement, you will answer for it." Aldrich's expression softened with what might have been respect. "Your loyalty to her honors you," he said. "I swear by my ancient name that she will come to no harm in my care. More than that, she will be cherished as the rare and precious soul she is." As if to demonstrate his words, Aldrich raised one hand toward the sky. The clouds above began to swirl and part, the endless snow finally slowing to scattered flakes. Within minutes, the first rays of true sunlight in over a week broke through the gloom, casting the village in golden light that made the snow sparkle like crushed diamonds. The effect on the villagers was immediate and profound. Children who had been listless with cold suddenly laughed and played. Adults stood straighter, their faces turned toward the warming light. It was not magic so much as hope made manifest, the simple proof that the impossible was possible, that their long nightmare might finally be ending. "Gather your belongings," Aldrich said to Elira, his voice gentle. "We leave within the hour. The wagons of supplies will arrive before nightfall." Elira nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and anticipation. She had made her choice, sealed her fate, with words spoken before witnesses. There would be no turning back now, no safe retreat into the familiar misery of her grief. As she walked back toward her cottage to pack the few possessions she wished to keep, she felt the letter crackle against her chest. Thomas had known this day would come, had prepared her as best he could for the moment when her true heritage would call her forward. Whether that heritage would prove blessing or curse remained to be seen. Behind her, the villagers began to organize themselves, hope replacing desperation as they prepared to receive the bounty Aldrich had promised. And beyond them all, the ancient vampire lord watched with eyes that held secrets she was only beginning to fathom, waiting patiently for her to take the first step into an entirely new existence. The crimson cloak fell around Elira's shoulders, like a whispered promise, its fabric warmer than any earthly material had a right to be. Aldrich fastened the silver clasp at her throat with gentle hands, his fingers brushing her skin with surprising warmth for one who claimed no heartbeat. "This belonged to someone precious to me," he said quietly, stepping back to study how the rich fabric complemented her weathered features. "She would have wanted it to protect another who faces the unknown with courage." Elira touched the cloak's edge, marveling at its weight and quality. The wool was finer than anything she had ever owned, dyed a deep burgundy that seemed to shift between red and black depending on how the light caught it. Silver threads were woven throughout, in patterns that suggested thorns and roses, creating a design both beautiful and melancholy. "What happened to her?" Elira asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Time," Aldrich replied simply. "The cruelest enemy of all mortal things. But that is the story for another evening, when we know each other well enough to share our deepest sorrows. The promised wagons had arrived as Aldrich said they would, sturdy carts pulled by horses that seemed far too healthy for the harsh winter conditions. The supplies they carried would indeed see the community through to spring: barrels of grain and preserved meat, bundles of seasoned firewood, boxes of medicines that Anna examined with wonder and growing excitement. Father Matthias approached with a small bundle wrapped in blessed cloth. "For protection," he said, pressing it into Elira's hands. "Not from him," he added, glancing at Aldrich with something approaching respect, "but from others who may not share his restraint." The bundle contained a silver pendant bearing the same crescent moon and rose symbol that had been on Thomas's letter. As Elira fastened it around her neck, she felt a subtle warmth spread through her chest. Not magical, exactly, but comforting in a way that spoke to deeper truths. "Your husband was a good man," Father Matthias said quietly. "He protected you well, but he always knew this day would come. Trust in what he taught you about recognizing truth from deception." Willem the blacksmith stepped forward last, his massive frame dwarfing even Aldrich despite the vampire's considerable height. "I still say this is madness," he declared, but his tone held grudging acceptance rather than anger. "But if it saves the children, then I suppose madness has its place." "Take care of them," Elira said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "All of them. And if spring brings travelers asking questions about what happened here, tell them only that the winter was hard, but that neighbors helped neighbors survive." The goodbye embraces were brief but heartfelt. Anna pressed a small vial of herb tonic into Elira's hands for strength during difficult transitions. Elena kissed her cheek and whispered, "Thanks for the courage to accept salvation when it wore an unexpected face." Even Henrik, stern and practical as stone, admitted that perhaps some risks were worth taking when the alternative was certain doom. As their simple cart rolled away from the only home she had ever known, Elira felt the familiar ache of loss settle in her chest. But it was different this time, not the devastating emptiness that had consumed her after Thomas's death, but the bittersweet pain of necessary endings. She was leaving safety and familiarity, yes, but she was also leaving behind the suffocating grip of despair. "Regrets already?" Aldrich asked, guiding their horses with expert hands along a path that seemed to appear from nothing as they travelled. "Always," Elira admitted, "but not about this choice. About the time I wasted in grief when I could have been helping them sooner. About the years I spent thinking myself ordinary when I carried the blood of mediators and bridge builders." "Grief is never wasted time," Aldrich said firmly. "It is how we honor what we have lost, how we process the magnitude of change. Without it, love would mean nothing, because we would never understand its true value." The landscape around them began to shift in ways that defied natural law. The snow gave way to patches of dark earth where winter flowers bloomed impossibly bright. Trees that should have been bare stretched green leaves toward a sky that seemed to deepen from pale winter blue to rich twilight purple. The very air grew warmer and more fragrant, carrying scents of jasmine and rosewood that had no place in a mountain winter. "What is this place?" Elira breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "The borderland," Aldrich explained. "The space between your world and mine, where both sets of natural laws hold sway. Most mortals cannot perceive it, they would see only more snow and barren trees. But you have the sight, the ability to look beyond the veil that separates one reality from another." A magnificent castle began to take shape on a distant peak, its spires reaching toward stars that were already visible despite the early hour. It was built of dark stone that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, creating an effect that was both ominous and breathtaking. Gothic arches and flying buttresses gave it an air of ancient grandeur, while the warm light glowing from its many windows suggested comfort and hospitality within. "Castle Ravenshollow," Aldrich said, noting her fascination. "My home for the past 4 centuries. It will be yours as well, for as long as you choose to remain. And if I choose to leave, then you leave," he replied without hesitation. "I am not a jailer, Elira. I seek companionship freely given, not submission forced through fear or manipulation. Your will remains your own, always." As they drew closer to the castle, figures began to emerge from the shadows, tall, pale, beings who moved with the same fluid grace as Aldrich, but whose eyes held none of his warmth or restraint. They watched the approaching cart with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "The court," Aldrich said quietly. "They will test you, as is their way. They have forgotten what it means to feel genuine emotion, so they view mortal attachments as weakness. Show them no fear, and they will respect you. Show them intelligence and dignity, and some may even come to value your presence." One figure stepped forward as their cart entered the castle's courtyard, a woman of devastating beauty whose platinum hair fell like a waterfall down her back. Her gown was cut from midnight blue silk that seemed to hold captured starlight, and her pale eyes held centuries of accumulated bitterness. "So," she said in a voice like silver bells touched with poison, "the great Aldrich finally brings home a pet. How quaint." "Lady Seraphina," Aldrich replied coolly, helping Elira down from the cart with careful courtesy. "May I present Elira Thornwick, last daughter of House Ravencrest and honoured guest in my home." The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the assembled vampires. Several stepped closer, their heightened senses no doubt detecting the truth of Aldrich's words in ways Elira could not fathom. Lady Seraphina's perfect features tightened with something that might have been anger or fear. "Impossible," she breathed. "That bloodline died out centuries ago." "Clearly not," Aldrich said mildly, placing a protective hand on Elira's shoulder. "Though it has slept long enough that most had forgotten its existence. Lady Elira will be residing in the Rose Tower, and I trust she will be treated with the courtesy due to one of her distinguished heritage." The vampires dispersed slowly, some bowing respectfully to Elira, while others simply vanished into the shadows. Lady Seraphina remained, her pale eyes promising future conflict, even as her lips curved in a smile of false sweetness. "Welcome to Ravenshollow," she purred. "I do so hope you will find your stay enlightening." The mirror of truth hung in Elira's chambers like a window into the soul itself, its silver surface reflecting not her physical form, but something far deeper and more revealing. Instead of her weathered face and greying hair, she saw herself as she truly was, a woman whose heart burned with compassion despite years of sorrow, whose spirit remained unbroken, though it bore the scars of profound loss. "It shows what we are beneath the masks we wear," Aldrich explained, standing carefully behind her so that his own reflection would not appear in the ancient glass. "Most of my kind avoid it, preferring their beautiful illusions to uncomfortable truths." Elira reached toward the mirror's surface, her fingers stopping just short of the silver. In the reflection, threads of golden light connected her to distant points beyond the chamber's walls, links to the village she had left, to memories of Thomas, to potentials not yet realized. But strongest of all was a silver cord that seemed to stretch toward where Aldrich stood, growing brighter each day they spent in each other's company. "What does it show you?" she asked quietly. "Pain," he replied after a long moment. "Centuries of it, layered like sediment in a riverbed. The weight of every life I have taken, every death I have witnessed, every love I have watched wither and fade. It is not a pleasant sight." She turned to face him directly, studying the careful control he maintained over his expression. "Yet, you keep it here, in the rooms prepared for me. Why? Because I wanted you to see that I hide nothing from you. That whatever grows between us will be built on truth, rather than the glamour and deception my kind typically employs." He moved to the tall windows that overlooked the castle's gardens, his hands clasped behind his back, "and perhaps because I hoped you would help me understand what the mirror sees in me that I cannot." The days had settled into a rhythm that surprised Elira with its naturalness. Mornings were spent exploring the castle's vast library, where Aldrich shared histories of the supernatural world that her heritage should have taught her. Afternoons brought long walks through gardens that bloomed eternally despite the winter raging beyond the castle's borders. Evenings found them in quiet conversation by fires that never seemed to need tending, sharing stories of their vastly different yet somehow parallel lives. She learned that he had been born the youngest son of a minor lord in the 12th century, turned to vampirism not by choice, but by the machinations of an enemy who thought to destroy him through what they considered a curse. Instead, he had embraced his new nature while retaining his humanity, using his immortal strength to protect those who could not protect themselves. "For 300 years, I maintained that purpose," he told her, as they walked beneath stars that seemed closer and brighter than any she had seen in the mortal world. "I was judge and protector, mediator and guardian. The mortal lords trusted me to keep the peace, and my own kind respected my strength enough to abide by the accords we established." "What changed?" Elira asked, though she suspected she knew. "Isabella." The name emerged like a prayer or a curse, weighted with emotion he rarely allowed himself to display. She was mortal, brilliant, brave beyond measure. A scholar who studied the old ways, the connections between our worlds. "We worked together for 7 years, and in that time I learned what it meant to love someone completely." They had stopped walking, and Aldrich stared up at the star-swept sky with eyes that held the memory of loss so profound it had reshaped his very nature. She grew ill, suddenly a wasting disease that no earthly medicine could touch. I offered her immortality, the chance to join me in eternal existence, but she refused. Why? Because she believed our love was made precious by its temporality, that knowing our time was limited gave weight to every moment we shared. She said she would rather burn bright for a few years than fade slowly over centuries. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She died in my arms at dawn on a spring morning, much like the one when I first found you at your husband's grave." Elira felt tears sting her eyes, understanding now the depth of recognition that had passed between them in that moment. They had each lost the person who gave their life meaning, each been forced to continue existing in a world that felt hollow without their beloved's presence. "How long ago?" she asked gently. 400 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The precision of his answer spoke to how carefully he had counted each moment of his grief. "I withdrew from the world after that, maintaining only the minimal contact necessary to prevent war. Between our peoples, the court you met tonight, they have been my only companions in all that time, and they are poor substitutes for genuine connection." "Lady Seraphina was among them then?" Aldrich's expression darkened slightly. "Seraphina has been part of my court for 2 centuries. She is beautiful, intelligent, and utterly without the capacity for selfless love. She desires me not for who I am, but for the power I represent, the status that would come from being acknowledged as my consort." They resumed walking, their path winding through gardens where night-blooming flowers released perfumes that seemed to carry memories on the wind. Elira found herself noticing details with supernatural clarity, the way moonlight caught in Aldrich's dark hair, the grace with which he moved despite his considerable size, the careful consideration he showed for her shorter stride. "The blood bond," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "I can feel it forming, can't I? That's why colors seem brighter, why I can sense your emotions even when you try to hide them. Yes, he admitted, stopping again to face her fully. It happens gradually when a mortal spends extended time in close contact with one of my kind. It is not harmful indeed. It grants enhanced perception and lengthened lifespan. But it also creates a connection that can be difficult to break. Are you trying to warn me away? I am trying to ensure your choice is made with full knowledge. The bond will deepen unless deliberately severed, and once fully formed, it links our fates together in ways that transcend ordinary mortal experience. Elira considered this, studying his face in the silver moonlight. She could indeed sense his emotions, now the careful hope he tried to suppress, the fear that she would reject him once she understood the implications, the deep loneliness that had driven him to seek her companionship despite the risks. And if I choose to let it form completely, then you would gain many of the benefits of vampire existence without losing your essential humanity. Longer life, enhanced abilities, the capacity to move freely between both worlds, but also the burden of watching mortal friends and family age and die while you remain unchanged. I have already buried everyone I loved, Elira said quietly. Perhaps it is time to build new connections with those who understand the weight of eternal existence. The hope that blazed in his eyes at her words was answer enough to the question forming between them. The blood bond was not a trap or a manipulation, it was an opportunity to forge a partnership that could bridge not just their two natures, but the centuries of loneliness that had hollowed them both. The Covenant chalice sat upon a pedestal of black marble in the center of the court's grand hall, its silver surface etched with runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the candlelight. Ancient beyond measure, it had witnessed countless unions between vampire and mortal over the millennia, each one sealed with promises that transcended the boundaries of life and death. The trials begin at moonrise, Lord Cassius announced, his pale features sharp as carved ivory. As the eldest member of Aldrich's court after their host himself, his words carried the weight of tradition and law. 3 tests to prove the mortal's worthiness to stand as equal among our kind. Elira studied the assembled vampires, noting how they watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. She had spent 3 weeks learning their customs, their history, their complex web of alliances and rivalries. Now all that knowledge would be put to the test. The trials are not what you might expect, Aldrich had warned her earlier as they prepared for this moment. They will not test your physical strength that would be meaningless against creatures of our power. Instead, they will challenge your wisdom, your compassion, and your ability to see truth through deception. Lady Seraphina stepped forward, her midnight blue gown rustling like whispered threats. The first trial is the test of wisdom, she declared, her voice carrying easily through the vaulted chamber. You will be presented with 3 scenarios, each requiring judgment that could affect both mortal and vampire alike. Choose wisely, the consequences of your decisions will be real, not theoretical. The first scenario materialized before Elira as if conjured from shadow and starlight, a village much like her own, plagued by mysterious deaths that occurred only during the new moon. The local lord demanded his vampire ally investigate and punish the guilty party, while the vampire suspected the deaths were caused by a rival mortal faction seeking to break their ancient peace treaty. Who do you trust? Lord Cassius asked. The mortal lord who provides protection for your kind, or the vampire whose survival depends on maintaining that? Alliance? Elira walked through the illusion, examining details that others might miss. The bite marks on the victims were wrong, too neat, too precise, lacking the desperate hunger that marked a vampire's feeding. The timing aligned with political tensions rather than supernatural needs. Most telling of all, the wounds showed signs of having been created with metal tools rather than fangs. Neither, she said firmly. The deaths are being staged by a third party who wishes to see the treaty broken. The vampire's suspicion of mortal involvement is correct, but not in the way he believes. Someone seeks to benefit from war between your peoples. The illusion dissolved, and several vampires nodded approval at her reasoning. Lady Seraphina's expression remained neutral, but Elira caught a flicker of surprise in her pale eyes. The second test proved more challenging. A vampire who had broken their most sacred law by creating offspring without permission, threatening to expose their existence to the mortal world. The traditional punishment was death, but the new vampire was barely more than a child, confused and terrified by what they had become. Justice demands punishment, the scenario's narrator intoned. But mercy suggests rehabilitation. What sentence do you pass? Elira closed her eyes, thinking of her own village, of the children who had nearly starved because their elders were too proud to accept help when it came in an unexpected form. When she opened them again, her voice carried absolute conviction. "Bind them to a mentor for a century of service and learning," she declared. Their sire's crime was not malice but ignorance. They did not understand the full weight of what they were doing. Death serves only vengeance, while guided service serves the greater good of both communities. This time, even Lord Cassius seemed impressed. "Wisdom tempered with compassion," he murmured. "A rare combination in our halls." The final test struck closer to home, a scenario involving a mortal woman who had discovered her vampire lover's true nature and threatened to expose him unless he granted her immortality. The woman was portrayed as manipulative and selfish, willing to destroy centuries of careful secrecy for her own desires. "She must die," several court members whispered. "The safety of all depends on maintaining the veil between worlds." But Elira studied the woman's face, seeing past the surface desperation to the fear beneath. "She does not seek immortality from greed," she said slowly. "She seeks it from terror. She has learned that vampires exist and assumes that knowledge makes her a target. Her threat is not blackmail but a desperate attempt to secure her own survival." "And your solution?" Lady Seraphina asked, her tone suggesting she expected failure. "Education," Elira replied. "Show her that knowledge need not equal danger. Introduce her to vampires who live peacefully alongside mortals. Give her a role in maintaining the secrecy she fears she has already broken. Transform her from a potential enemy into an active ally." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Elira to wonder if she had failed completely. Then Aldrich stepped forward, his expression filled with something that might have been pride. "The wisdom of the mediators," he said softly, "always seeking to build bridges rather than burn them." The second trial, the test of compassion, required her to ease the suffering of 3 ancient vampires who had grown weary of existence. Each presented a different form of despair, one who could no longer remember what it felt like to experience genuine emotion, one who had watched every mortal they ever cared for die of old age, and one who had committed terrible acts in their early years and could not forgive themselves. For the first, Elira shared her own recent experience with numbing grief, showing him that the absence of feeling was not healing, but merely postponement. For the second, she spoke of how love's memory could honor the dead rather than torture the living. For the third, she offered the wisdom Thomas had given her years ago, that redemption came not from forgetting past mistakes, but from ensuring they led to better choices in the future. Each vampire left their session with something they had not possessed before: hope, perspective, or simply the knowledge that someone else understood their particular burden. The final trial tested her ability to see through supernatural deception, to distinguish truth from the elaborate illusions her kind had perfected over millennia. She walked through a maze of false memories and phantom emotions, guided only by the silver pendant Father Matthias had given her, and the growing strength of her bond with Aldrich. When the trials ended, the Covenant chalice began to glow with soft silver light, its ancient magic recognizing her worthiness to stand as bridge between worlds. But as she reached toward it, Lady Seraphina's voice cut through the ceremonial silence. "Wait," the vampire lady commanded, her beautiful face twisted with barely contained fury. "There is something the court must know before we proceed with this union." Elira felt Aldrich tense beside her, his supernatural senses no doubt detecting the threat in Seraphina's tone. Whatever the other vampire intended to reveal, it would change everything they had built together. The chalice's light flickered, as if sensing the conflict to come. The phoenix pendant at Elira's throat blazed to life as Lady Seraphina spoke, its mystical fire burning away the carefully woven illusions that had been gathering in the great hall like invisible spiderwebs. Through its protection, Elira could see the attempts at mental manipulation for what they truly were, desperate attacks by a vampire who had already lost the battle for Aldrich's affections. "The mortal bears the mark of the hunters," Seraphina declared, her voice ringing with false authority. "Look at the pendant she wears. It bears the seal of those who have sought our destruction for centuries." Several court members shifted uneasily, their enhanced senses detecting the truth in Seraphina's words, even as they missed her deeper deception. The pendant did indeed bear hunter markings, but its current purpose was protection, not destruction. Father Matthias had blessed it specifically to guard against vampire mind control, ensuring that Elira's choices would be her own. "Is this true?" Lord Cassius demanded, his ancient eyes fixed on the glowing pendant. "It is," Elira replied calmly, making no attempt to hide or deny what hung around her neck. "My heritage includes the blood of those who once stood between our two worlds. But I am not here as their weapon, I am here as their bridge." "Lies wrapped in pretty words," Seraphina hissed, her perfect composure finally cracking to reveal the jealousy and desperation beneath. "She seeks to destroy us from within, to win our trust before striking at our hearts." Aldrich moved forward, his own power beginning to fill the hall with shadows that writhed like living things. "Enough, Seraphina. Your accusations reek of personal grievance rather than genuine concern." "Do they?" The vampire lady turned to face him directly, her pale eyes blazing with centuries of unrequited desire. "When did you last feel anything genuine, Aldrich? When did you last experience emotion that was not tainted by supernatural influence? She carries hunter blood, blood that calls to the guilt and pain you have buried for 4 centuries. The accusation struck like a physical blow, and Elira felt the assembled court's attention focus on her with new intensity. Was her connection to Aldrich real, or merely the product of her supernatural heritage manipulating his vampire nature? The question had lurked in her own mind during quiet moments, but now it stood exposed for all to examine. "The pendant will show us the truth," Lord Cassius declared, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "If her feelings are genuine, it will continue to glow with protective fire. If they are false, manufactured by her hunter blood to manipulate Lord Aldrich, the light will fade to nothing." Elira touched the pendant, feeling its warmth pulse against her palm like a living heartbeat. Around her, the court held its collective breath, waiting for the ancient magic to render its verdict. Even Aldrich seemed frozen, his dark eyes fixed on her face as if trying to read the truth there. The pendant's glow remained steady, neither growing brighter nor dimming, but its color began to shift from pure white to something deeper and more complex. Gold threaded through the silver light, speaking of genuine affection built through shared understanding. Blue followed, representing the peace she felt in Aldrich's presence. Finally, deep crimson bloomed at the pendant's heart, not the red of blood or violence, but the rich color of love, freely given without expectation of return. "The magic speaks clearly," Lord Cassius announced, though his expression showed surprise at the pendant's verdict. "Her feelings are not manufactured by heritage or supernatural influence. They are as genuine as any mortal heart can offer." Lady Seraphina's face twisted with rage and disbelief. "Impossible. The pendant must be corrupted. its magic compromised by hunter enchantments. "The magic is pure," came a new voice from the hall's entrance. Father Matthias stepped into the chamber, his elderly frame somehow commanding respect, even among creatures who could have crushed him without effort. "I blessed it myself, and I know the heart of the one who wears it. What right does a mortal priest have to enter our sacred halls?" Serafina demanded, but her protest lacked conviction. The presence of the holy man seemed to drain some of her supernatural influence, leaving her more exposed than she had been in centuries. "The right of one who has served as guardian to the bridge builders for 40 years, Father Matthias replied calmly. "The right of one who baptized Elira as a child, married her to her husband, and watched over her during the dark years of her grief. I know her soul, Lady Serafina, as you clearly do not." He turned to address the entire court, his voice carrying surprising authority. "The hunter bloodlines were not all dedicated to destruction, as some of you have chosen to remember. Many served as mediators, as peacekeepers, as those who could stand between vampire and mortal to prevent the wars that would have destroyed both peoples." "Then why did they disappear?" Lord Cassius asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier suspicion. "Because vampires like Lady Serafina convinced their courts that any mortal with supernatural heritage was a threat to be eliminated," Father Matthias replied bluntly. "The bridge builders were hunted nearly to extinction by way. The very people they sought to serve. Only a few bloodlines survived, hidden and protected by those who remembered their true purpose." The revelation sent ripples of shock through the assembled court. Several vampires exchanged glances that suggested uncomfortable recognition, while others seemed to be reassessing long-held beliefs about their species' history. "You lie," Serafina whispered, but her words carried no conviction. "The hunters were our enemies, seeking our destruction." "Some were," Father Matthias agreed. "Those who had lost loved ones to vampire predation, those who feared what they could not understand. But others sought balance, cooperation, a way for both peoples to coexist without endless bloodshed. Elira's grandmother was among the greatest of those mediators, preventing 3 separate wars through her wisdom and diplomacy." Aldrich stepped forward, his expression showing a mixture of wonder and growing understanding. "The Raven Crest Accords," he said, slowly. "The peace treaties that ended the blood wars of the 15th century, they were negotiated by a mortal woman named Elena Ravencrest. Elira's grandmother," Father Matthias confirmed, "the woman who convinced the vampire lords that cooperation served their interests better than conquest, who showed them that mortal allies were more valuable than mortal cattle." The weight of this revelation settled over the court like falling snow. Elira found herself at the center of a legacy she had never imagined, carrying the blood of those who had shaped the supernatural world's hidden history. The pendant at her throat continued to glow, its light now clearly recognizable as the genuine fire of protective love, rather than manipulative hunter magic. Lady Serafina stood alone now, her accusations revealed as the desperate jealousy they had always been. Around her, the court was beginning to see Elira not as a threat, but as the return of something precious they had thought lost. Forever a bridge between worlds, a mediator who could help them find their way back from the isolation that had defined vampire existence for centuries. But as the Lady Vampire's beautiful features twisted with fury and humiliation, Elira sensed that this victory had come at a price. Serafina would not accept defeat gracefully, and the battle for Aldrich's heart was far from over. The Bloodline Codex lay open on the ancient reading table, like a wound in reality itself, its pages written in silver ink that seemed to move and shift as Elira stared at it in growing horror. The tome had been hidden in the deepest vaults of Castle Ravenshollow for centuries, brought forth only when Lady Serafina's desperate research had uncovered a truth that would shatter everything Elira thought she knew about herself. "Read it," Serafina commanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of triumph and desperation. "Read what your precious priest conveniently forgot to mention about your noble heritage." The assembled court pressed closer as Elira's eyes traced the elegant script that detailed her family's true history. The words seemed to burn themselves into her mind, each revelation more devastating than the last. The Ravencrest line had indeed served as mediators between vampire and mortal, but only after generations of breeding and selection that had created something far more dangerous than simple diplomats. "The Ravencrest bloodline," Elira read aloud, her voice growing steadier even as her world crumbled around her. "Cultivated over 7 generations through selective union with vampire lords, designed to produce offspring capable of resisting supernatural influence while wielding power sufficient to destroy entire vampire courts. Each daughter trained from birth in the arts of war and diplomacy, serving as both ambassador and ultimate deterrent against vampire aggression." Father Matthias stepped forward, his face pale with anguish. "Child, you must understand the times were different then. The vampire courts were more violent, more predatory. Your ancestors sought to create balance through strength to ensure mortals would never again be helpless against supernatural predation. By creating living weapons disguised as peacemakers," Aldrich said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of pain and dawning understanding. "No wonder the connection between us felt so immediate, so natural. You were bred to be irresistible to my kind, to earn our trust before destroying us." Lord Cassius finished, his ancient eyes fixed on Elira with new wariness. "The perfect hunter, designed to strike from within our very hearts." Elira's hands trembled as she continued reading, discovering abilities she had never known she possessed. The power to drain vampire strength with a touch, the ability to turn their own supernatural senses against them, knowledge of pressure points that could paralyze even the most ancient of their kind. All of it locked away in her blood, waiting for the proper trigger to awaken. "The trigger is emotional connection," she read, her voice barely a whisper. "When the descendant forms a genuine bond with a vampire lord, her dormant abilities activate gradually. The deeper the connection, the more devastating her potential becomes." The irony was not lost on anyone present. By falling in love with Aldrich, by opening her heart to him completely, she had unknowingly armed herself with the power to destroy him. Every moment of growing closeness, every shared confidence and gentle touch had been preparing her for a role she had never chosen and never wanted. "Did you know?" Aldrich asked Father Matthias, his voice carefully controlled but carrying undercurrents that made several court members step back nervously. "I suspected," the priest admitted, his weathered hands clasped tightly before him. "But I prayed the bloodline had grown too diluted, that too many generations had passed for spawn, the abilities to manifest fully. When Thomas told me of Elira's unusual resistances to illness and her uncanny ability to read people's true natures, I began to fear the worst. You should have told me," Elira said, her own voice beginning to carry echoes of power that had not been there before. The revelation was awakening things that had slumbered in her blood, ancient knowledge rising to the surface, like artifacts uncovered by a shifting tide. "What would you have done with such knowledge?" Father Matthias asked gently. "Would you have chosen differently, knowing that every vampire you met would see you as either the ultimate prize or the ultimate threat? Would your love for Lord Aldrich have grown naturally, or would it have been poisoned by the understanding of what that love would cost?" The phoenix pendant at Elira's throat had begun to pulse with new rhythms, its protective magic shifting as her awakening abilities changed the fundamental nature of who she was. The gentle warmth it had provided was becoming something sharper, more focused, a weapon rather than a shield. "The pendant is responding to her transformation," Lord Cassius observed with clinical detachment. "Hunter magic, recognizing its true wielder. How long before she becomes a danger to us all?" "She is not a danger," Aldrich said firmly, though uncertainty flickered in his dark eyes. "Elira would never use such power to harm the innocent." Perhaps not willingly, Lady Seraphina interjected, her earlier triumph curdling into something more complex as she realized the full implications of what she had uncovered. But the Codex speaks of compulsions built into the bloodline, magical imperatives that activate during times of stress. She may have no choice in the matter. As if summoned by Seraphina's words, images began to flash through Elira's mind, memories that were not her own but belonged to her ancestors. She saw vampire courts burning as women who looked like her walked through them, untouched by fang or claw. She witnessed negotiations where her forebears had held ancient lords at bay through the simple threat of what they could unleash. She felt the weight of a legacy built on the knife's edge between peace and annihilation. "I can feel them," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists as power that had never been hers began to course through her veins. The abilities, the compulsions, the hunger for vampire destruction. It's like a second voice in my mind, whispering that you are all threats to be eliminated. The court began to disperse, ancient survival instincts overriding centuries of careful civilization. Only Aldrich remained close, his expression showing pain rather than fear, as he watched the woman he loved struggle with a heritage that might make their continued association impossible. "Fight it," he urged, reaching out to touch her face despite the obvious risk. "You are more than what you were bred to be. Love is stronger than programming, choice stronger than destiny." "Is it?" Elira looked up at him, and for a moment he saw something alien in her eyes, the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. "Or is this what you were always meant to feel?" The Codex speaks of how vampire lords become utterly devoted to Ravencrest women, how that devotion blinds them to the danger until it is too late. "How do you know your love for me is real, and not simply the result of supernatural manipulation?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade, cutting away the certainty they had built together over weeks of growing closeness. Around them, the court watched in fascination and terror as the perfect love story revealed its poisoned core. "Because I choose to believe it is real," Aldrich replied finally. "Because the alternative that everything we have shared is a lie designed to destroy me is unacceptable. If you must be my destroyer, then at least let it be as the woman I love, rather than the weapon you were made to be." Elira felt tears streaming down her cheeks, though she could not tell if they came from her human heart or were simply another manipulation designed to lower his defenses. The voice in her mind was growing stronger, more insistent, showing her exactly how to strike for maximum devastation, how to turn his love into the very weapon that would end him. "The prophecy," Father Matthias said suddenly, his voice cutting through her internal struggle. "There is more to the Codex than Lady Seraphina read. The final entry speaks of choice, of a descendant who could either fulfill the bloodline's purpose or transcend it entirely. Lady Seraphina moved to block his path to the tome, but Elira's newly awakened power sent the vampire lady flying across the hall without conscious thought. The display of casual strength sent fresh ripples of fear through the assembled court, but Father Matthias pressed on undaunted. "When the final daughter loves truly and is truly loved in return," he read, "she will face the choice that defines not just her own fate, but the future of both peoples, to destroy what threatens or to transform what divides. Her decision will either end the age of shadows or begin the age of unity." Elira looked up at Aldrich, seeing her own desperate hope reflected in his eyes. Perhaps her heritage was not just about destruction after all. Perhaps the power awakening in her blood could be turned to a different purpose entirely. The sanctified blade lay upon the altar of the castle's ancient chapel, its silver surface unmarked by time or tarnished despite centuries of neglect. As Elira approached, the weapon began to resonate with a low hum that seemed to echo in her bones, responding to the hunter blood that now flowed freely through her awakened consciousness. "It was your great-grandmother's," Father Matthias explained, his weathered hands clasped in prayer as he watched her reach toward the legendary weapon. Elena. Ravencrest wielded it not to destroy vampire lords, but to compel their cooperation. The blade responds to intent. It becomes a tool of justice for those who seek balance, but a weapon of vengeance for those consumed by hatred. 3 days had passed since the revelation in the Great Hall. 3 days during which the vampire court had retreated to safe distances, while Elira struggled to master abilities that grew stronger with each passing hour. The voice in her mind, her ancestral programming, whispered constantly now, showing her weaknesses in every vampire she encountered, detailing exactly how to exploit their supernatural vulnerabilities. "The compulsions are growing stronger," she admitted to Aldrich as he stood in the chapel's doorway, maintaining careful distance for both their sakes. "Sometimes I find myself calculating attack patterns without conscious thought. Yesterday, when Lord Cassius approached too quickly, I nearly struck him down before I realized what I was doing." "But you stopped yourself," Aldrich pointed out, though his voice carried strain from the constant vigilance their situation required. "You are not a slave to your heritage, Elira. Choice remains yours, no matter what your blood demands." Outside the chapel's stained glass windows, supernatural forces were gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Word of a Ravencrest descendant had spread beyond the castle walls, drawing attention from vampire courts across the continent. Some came seeking to destroy her before she could fulfill her destined purpose. Others hoped to capture and control her, to turn the ultimate vampire hunter into a weapon for their own ambitions. "The siege will begin before dawn," Lord Cassius reported, his ancient voice heavy with resignation. "Count Draven leads them. He commands 7 courts and nearly 200 vampires. They fear what you represent more than they desire what you might offer." The irony was bitter as winter wine. Elira had come to this place seeking healing for her broken heart, offering companionship to a lonely immortal. Instead, she had become the catalyst for a supernatural war that could destroy the delicate peace that had existed for centuries. "There is another way," Lady Seraphina said from the chapel's entrance, her beautiful features marked by exhaustion and what might have been genuine remorse. "The ritual of severance. It could cut the hunter bloodline from you permanently, make you fully mortal again." "At what cost?" Elira asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Your connection to Aldrich would be broken forever," Seraphina admitted. "The blood bond, the enhanced abilities, the capacity to move freely between our worlds, all of it would be lost. You would return to being what you were before, a grieving widow with nothing but mortal concerns." The offer hung between them like a tempting poison. To go back to being ordinary, to escape the crushing weight of inherited purpose and awakening power. Part of her longed for that simplicity, even as another part recoiled from it. "And the siege," Aldrich asked. "Would likely continue," Lord Cassius said grimly. "They come not just for her, but for any who would harbour a Ravencrest descendant. We have been marked as traitors to our kind, simply by showing her welcome." Elira lifted the sanctified blade from its resting place, feeling its weight settle into her hand as if it belonged there. The weapon's surface began to glow with soft silver light, and images flashed through her mind, not the violent visions her heritage provided, but something else entirely. She saw vampires and mortals working together, councils where both peoples had equal voice, a world where supernatural abilities served protection rather than predation. "The blade shows what could be," she whispered, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking over mountains. "Not destruction, but transformation. Not the end of vampire courts, but their evolution into something better." Father Matthias stepped closer, his eyes bright with sudden hope. The true purpose of the Ravencrest line was never elimination, it was evolution. Your ancestors weren't just weapons disguised as diplomats. They were catalysts, designed to force supernatural society to grow beyond its primitive origins. But how? Aldrich asked, moving closer despite the danger her awakening powers represented. The courts have remained unchanged for millennia. What could compel them to abandon traditions that have defined their existence? Proof that change is possible, Elira replied, the blade's wisdom flowing through her consciousness. Demonstration that vampire nature need not be fixed and immutable. If even one court can transform itself, others will follow rather than be left behind. The chapel doors burst open as Anna, the village healer, stumbled inside with news that sent ice through Elira's veins. "The lowland villages," she gasped, her breath coming in sharp pants from her desperate ride. "Count Draven's forces have taken them. Every mortal settlement between here and the coast burned or enslaved. He means to use them as leverage against you." The revelation hit Elira like a physical blow. Hundreds of innocent people, families with children, elderly couples, young lovers, planning their futures, all held hostage because of what she represented. The voice in her mind seized on this knowledge, showing her exactly how vampire arrogance and cruelty had always operated, demanding that she unleash her full power in righteous vengeance. "This is why your line was created," the ancestral whispers insisted. "This is why the world needs its monsters destroyed rather than redeemed." But the blade in her hand pulsed with different energy, showing her another path. The captured villagers could be saved, but not through the massacre her heritage demanded. They would be freed through something far more radical, the transformation of their captors into protectors. "You have a plan," Aldrich observed, reading something in her expression that others might miss. "The most dangerous plan imaginable," Elira confirmed, looking around at the assembled allies who had chosen to stand with her despite the risks. "We're going to save those villagers by doing exactly what Count Draven fears most, proving that vampires can choose to be more than predators." "Impossible," Lord Cassius protested. "Draven and his followers have reverted to the old ways. They feed on mortal fear and suffering. Nothing will convince them to release their captives." "Nothing conventional," Elira agreed. "But I carry more than just the power to destroy vampires. I carry the ability to heal what immortality has broken in them, to restore the capacity for growth and change that centuries of stagnation have buried." She held up the blade, its light now blazing so brightly that it cast rainbows through the chapel's stained glass. "Windows. Every vampire was mortal once. They all carry memories of what it meant to love, to hope, to dream of something better than mere survival. The hunter abilities awakening in me don't just show me how to kill, they show me how to reach those buried memories and bring them back to the surface." "The risk," Father Matthias began, "is enormous," Elira finished. "If I fail, I'll likely be consumed by the very power I'm trying to control. The ancestral programming will take over completely, and I'll become exactly the weapon of mass destruction my bloodline intended. But if I succeed, if you succeed, you'll transform the entire supernatural world," Aldrich said quietly. "You'll prove that choice is stronger than nature, that love can overcome centuries of inherited hatred." Lady Seraphina stepped forward, her expression showing a mixture of terror and desperate hope. "Count me among your allies," she said formally. "I have spent 2 centuries consumed by jealousy and bitterness. If you can offer the possibility of change, of becoming something better than what I am, then I will follow you into whatever hell awaits." One by one, the others added their voices to hers. Lord Cassius, despite his doubts. Anna, representing the mortal world that hung in the balance. Even Father Matthias, whose faith had guided him through 4 decades of protecting hunter descendants, pledged his support for this most unlikely of crusades. As dawn approached, bringing with it the siege that would determine the fate of both worlds, Elira felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a mantle. The sanctified blade hummed with power in her hand, ready to serve whatever purpose her heart demanded. Whether that purpose would be salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But for the first time since the revelation of her true heritage, she felt something stronger than fear or confusion flowing through her veins. She felt hope, dangerous, transformative hope that whispered of possibilities no one had dared imagine. The final battle was about to begin, and everything would change before it ended. The Unity Crown materialized above the battlefield like starlight given form, its ethereal circlet weaving itself from the very air as Elira stepped onto the castle's battlements to face Count Draven's assembled host. The ancient artifact had not been seen for 7 centuries, but the convergence of hunter and vampire bloodlines, the presence of the sanctified blade, and the sheer weight of destiny had called it forth from whatever realm it had waited in. "Behold the pretender!" Count Draven called from across the snow-covered courtyard, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. He was magnificent in his terrible beauty, tall and pale as carved marble, dressed in armor that seemed to drink in moonlight and reflect it as shadow. Behind him, 200 vampires stood in perfect formation, their eyes glowing like crimson stars in the pre-dawn. Darkness. "She comes bearing hunter weapons to a peaceful parley," the Count continued, gesturing toward the sanctified blade at Elira's side. "Proof that the Ravencrest line remains what it has always been, a threat to be eliminated rather than a bridge to be honored." Elira walked forward slowly, each step causing the crown to pulse with brighter radiance. The artifact hovered just above her head, neither touching nor truly separate, its light revealing truths that had been hidden for centuries. Around Count Draven, she could see the shadows of what his followers had once been, mortal men and women who had loved, laughed, dreamed of futures that death had stolen from them. "I see you, Marquis of Whitefield," she called to a vampire near Draven's left shoulder, her voice carrying supernatural clarity. "You were a blacksmith once, newly married, with hands that created rather than destroyed. The forge fire that took your life also forged your compassion. It burns still buried, beneath centuries of forced cruelty." The vampire she had addressed stumbled backward, his perfect composure cracking as memories long suppressed began to surface. Around him, others shifted uneasily as the crown's light revealed their own forgotten humanity. "Silence her!" Count Draven commanded, but his order lacked conviction. The Unity Crown's power was growing stronger, fed by Elira's genuine desire to heal rather than harm. "Lady Catherine de Montrose," Elira continued, focusing on a female vampire whose elaborate gown could not disguise the pain in her ancient eyes. "You ruled justly for 40 years before plague claimed your people. You chose vampirism not for power, but to continue protecting those who survived. That noble heart beats still, waiting to remember its purpose." Lady Catherine raised one hand to her throat, her fingers trembling as she felt the phantom pulse of the mortal heart she had thought lost forever. Tears impossible for a vampire began to streak down her pale cheeks. "What is this sorcery?" Count Draven demanded, but his voice now carried uncertainty rather than command. "Not sorcery," Elira replied, stepping closer despite the overwhelming presence of so many predators. "Truth. The Unity Crown shows what we were before pain and time taught us to bury our better natures. It reminds us that transformation is possible, that we can choose to grow rather than simply endure." The sanctified blade at her side began to resonate with the crown's energy, its silver surface reflecting not the gathered vampires as they appeared now, but as they could become beings of power and wisdom, who used their immortal strength to protect rather than prey upon the innocent. "Enough!" Count Draven drew his own weapon, a blade forged from vampire bone and quenched in mortal blood. "You offer pretty illusions to mask your true purpose. I know what you are, daughter of hunters. I know what you were bred to do." "Do you?" Elira asked, raising the sanctified blade, as the unity crown's light blazed brighter. Then you know that my ancestors' greatest victory was not in destroying vampires, but in transforming them. The courts that survived their intervention were those wise enough to evolve beyond mere predation. She could feel the power building within her, not just the destructive abilities her heritage had awakened, but something far more profound. The crown was channeling energy from every vampire present, drawing on their buried memories of mortality, their suppressed dreams of redemption, their secret longing to be more than the monsters they had become. "Show them, Marcus," she called to the former blacksmith, extending her free hand toward him. "Show them what choosing transformation over stagnation looks like." The vampire named Marcus stepped forward against Count Draven's increasingly frantic commands, drawn by something he could not name but recognized as profoundly important. When his fingers touched Elira's outstretched hand, light exploded between them, not the harsh glare of destruction, but the warm radiance of a forge fire, creative and life-giving. For the first time in 3 centuries, Marcus remembered what it felt like to build rather than tear down, to create beauty rather than spread fear. The transformation was visible to everyone present, his pale skin warming with the memory of life, his crimson eyes softening to their original brown, his very posture changing from predatory crouch to the proud stance of a craftsman. "Impossible," Count Draven whispered, but even he could not deny what stood before them all, a vampire who had chosen to reclaim his humanity without losing his immortal power. The unity crown pulsed once more, and suddenly every vampire on the battlefield could feel what Marcus felt: the possibility of change, of growth, of becoming something greater than what they had settled for during centuries of unchanging existence. The eternal bond seal blazed to life on both Elira's and Aldrich's foreheads as Count Draven's remaining forces charged across the courtyard, their ancient leader's rage finally overcoming his tactical restraint. The mystical mark appeared as intertwining silver crescents that pulsed in perfect synchronization, announcing to all present that hunter and vampire had chosen unity over the eternal conflict their bloodlines demanded. "Kill them all." Draven screamed, his composure finally shattered by the sight of his own followers beginning to question centuries of inherited hatred. "Show them what mercy earns in the real world." But as the attacking vampires reached the castle's outer defenses, something unprecedented occurred. Those who had been touched by the Unity Crown's revelation found themselves unable to strike killing blows against the mortal defenders. Lady Catherine de Montrose, her noble heart, awakened by Elira's intervention, turned her supernatural speed toward protecting rather than destroying, placing herself between her former allies and the human villagers they had brought as hostages. "I remember now," she called out, her voice ringing across the battlefield with newfound conviction. "I remember why I chose immortality, not for personal power, but to serve something greater than myself. These people deserve protection, not predation." Marcus the blacksmith joined her, using his centuries of accumulated strength to forge barriers of twisted metal that shielded the innocent from vampire claws. Around them, others were making similar choices, the crown's influence spreading like ripples across a pond as each transformed vampire inspired another to remember their buried humanity. Elira stood at the center of the chaos, the sanctified blade in her hands, blazing with energy that was no longer purely destructive. Instead, it had become a conduit for transformation, each strike healing spiritual wounds that had festered for centuries rather than inflicting new ones. When she touched a vampire consumed by bloodlust, they found their predatory nature not destroyed but refined, transformed into protective instincts that made them guardians rather than monsters. "This is what you fear," she called to Count Draven as he carved his way through the melee toward her, his bone blade leaving trails of shadow in the air. "Not death evolution, Not the end of vampire power, but its elevation to something worthy of immortality. Lady Seraphina appeared at Elira's side, her own transformation complete and profound. The jealousy and bitterness that had defined her for 2 centuries had been replaced by something she had thought lost forever, the capacity for selfless love. Not romantic obsession, but genuine care for others' well-being. "Stand aside, Seraphina," Count Draven demanded, his ancient authority warring with the new reality taking shape around them. "Do not let her poison infect you as well." "The only poison here is the hatred you cling to," Seraphina replied, placing herself between the Count and Elira with absolute resolve. "I spent 200 years consumed by jealousy, believing that love was something to be taken rather than given. She has shown me what I could become if I chose growth over stagnation." The battle raged around them, but it was unlike any conflict in supernatural history. Vampires fought not to destroy, but to defend. Their immortal strength turned toward protecting the innocent rather than consuming them. The mortal villagers, freed from their captivity by Catherine's noble choice, worked alongside their former captors to create something unprecedented, a community where supernatural power served mortal needs. Aldrich fought his way to Elira's side, the eternal bond seal on his forehead, marking him as her partner in this transformation rather than her victim. Together, they faced Count Draven's final assault, their combined power representing the synthesis of everything the vampire lord feared most: change, growth, the possibility that immortal existence could be more than endless repetition of ancient patterns. "You offer them weakness, disguised as strength," Draven snarled, his bone blade clashing against the sanctified blade with sparks that lit the entire battlefield. "Vampires who care about mortal welfare are vampires who have forgotten their true nature." "No," Elira replied, the Unity Crown's energy flowing through her voice to reach every supernatural being present. "Vampires who care about mortal welfare are vampires who have remembered their true nature, the humanity they carried into immortality but buried beneath centuries of forced cruelty." The Count's blade shattered against 2P24. The sanctified blade's transformative power, its bone construction unable to withstand contact with genuine hope for redemption. As the fragments fell like snow around them, something extraordinary occurred. Count Draven himself began to change, the Crown's influence finally penetrating the armor of hatred and fear he had built around his heart. For a moment, ancient memories surfaced: a young lord who had genuinely cared for his people, who had accepted vampirism only to continue protecting them from supernatural threats. The man he had been before centuries of isolation and bitterness had twisted his noble intentions into predatory arrogance. I remember," he whispered, his perfect features cracking with the first genuine emotion he had allowed himself to feel in 500 years. "I remember why I thought immortality was worth the price." The transformation spread through his remaining followers like dawn breaking over a battlefield, each vampire touched by the revelation that they could choose to become more than what they had settled for. The siege ended not with victory or defeat, but with something far more profound: the birth of a new age, where supernatural power served the cause of protection rather than predation. As the Unity Crown settled gently onto Elira's brow and the eternal bond seal pulsed with satisfied radiance, she realized they had done something previously thought impossible. They had changed the fundamental nature of an immortal species through the simple but revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. The memory stone formed slowly in Elira's hands as she sat in the garden where she and Aldrich had first shared their deepest sorrows, its crystalline surface capturing the essence of their extraordinary journey from grief to love, from conflict to transformation. The artifact pulsed with warm light, preserving not just the events of recent weeks, but the emotions that had made those events meaningful: the hope found in despair, the love discovered in loneliness, the redemption born from the courage to change. It will ensure that future generations understand what truly happened here, Father Matthias explained, his weathered hands gentle as he blessed the stone's creation. Not the myth that will inevitably grow around these events, but the truth that transformation came not through force, but through the simple choice to see beyond what was to what could be. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. The vampire courts across Europe had sent delegations to witness what many still considered impossible immortal beings who had chosen to evolve beyond their predatory origins. Castle Ravenshollow had become a center of learning where vampires and mortals worked together to forge new relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. Lady Catherine de Montrose had established schools in 3 major cities, using her centuries of accumulated wealth to create institutions where supernatural abilities were taught alongside human knowledge. Her transformation from elegant predator to noble protector had inspired dozens of other ancient vampires to examine their own purposes and possibilities. Marcus, the blacksmith, had returned to his forge, but now he crafted protective amulets and defensive weapons rather than instruments of war. His workshop had become a gathering place where mortal artisans learned from immortal expertise while teaching their undead colleagues the satisfaction that came from creating rather than destroying. Even Count Draven, perhaps the most profound transformation of all, had dedicated himself to establishing protective networks throughout the countryside. The same strategic mind that had once orchestrated raids on mortal settlements now worked tirelessly to shield those settlements from supernatural threats. The changes spread further each day, Anna reported as she joined Elira in the garden, her healer's wisdom now enhanced by knowledge of vampire physiology that allowed her to treat ailments in both species. 3 more courts have sent envoys requesting guidance on peaceful transformation. The old ways are dying, replaced by something none of us could have imagined. But perhaps the most significant change was in Elira herself. The Unity Crown had become a permanent part of her, invisible, except when its power was needed, marking her as the bridge between worlds that her bloodline had always been destined to create. The destructive abilities of her hunter heritage remained, but they had been transformed into something constructive, the power to heal what immortality had broken, to restore the capacity for growth that centuries of stagnation had buried. "Do you ever regret it?" Aldrich asked, as he approached through the twilight, his own transformation evident in the warmth that had replaced the careful distance he once maintained. The eternal bond seal they shared had evolved into something deeper than magical connection, a partnership that transcended the boundaries between vampire and mortal, immortal and human. "Which part?" Elira smiled, gesturing to encompass the impossible life they had built together. "Leaving my village, accepting your offer, discovering my heritage, fighting a war, choosing transformation over destruction. All of it, any of it." He settled beside her on the stone bench, where they had first shared the story of his lost love, Isabella, though that pain had been transformed by new joy into something bittersweet rather than devastating. "You could have had a simple life, free from supernatural complications." "Simple lives are overrated," Elira replied, holding up the memory stone to catch the last rays of sunlight. Within its depths, she could see their story playing out like a crystal vision, 2 lonely souls finding each other in the darkness, choosing love over fear, transformation over tradition. "Besides, I tried simple. For 53 years I lived quietly, safely, conventionally. It took meeting an ancient vampire to teach me that sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking." Lady Seraphina approached from the castle, her expression radiant with the kind of joy that could only come from serving something greater than oneself. Her jealousy had been transformed into fierce protectiveness, making her one of the most effective advocates for peaceful coexistence between the species. "The evening council is ready to begin," she announced, though her tone held anticipation rather than duty. Each night brought new challenges as they worked to establish protocols for a world where vampires served as guardians rather than predators, where immortal wisdom guided rather than dominated mortal decisions. "Just a few more minutes," Elira requested, still marveling at how naturally Serafina had accepted her new role. The vampire who had once seen her as a rival had become one of her strongest allies, proving that even the deepest animosities could be transformed by genuine commitment to change. As true darkness settled over the garden, the supernatural world came alive around them. But instead of the predatory stalking that had once characterized vampire activity, there was purposeful movement, guards taking up protective positions, healers making their rounds, teachers preparing lessons that would preserve both human knowledge and vampire wisdom for future generations. "The memory stone is complete," Father Matthias observed, noting how the crystal had grown solid and stable in Elira's hands. "It will preserve this story for those who come after, ensuring they understand that love can triumph over any heritage. That choice is stronger than destiny." Elira stood, cradling the stone that held the essence of their transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they continued building bridges between worlds that had been enemies for millennia. There would be setbacks, resistances, those who chose hatred over hope. But tonight, in this garden where two lonely souls had first recognized each other, she felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. "Come," she said to Aldrich, taking his hand as she had that first dawn when he offered her an escape from grief. "Let's go build a better world." Together, they walked toward the castle where mortals and immortals worked side by side, where the future was being written by those brave enough to believe that change was possible. The memory stone pulsed once in Elira's hands, sealing their story forever, a testament to the transformative power of love freely given and hope courageously chosen.